So my first audition was San Diego Symphony. That was when I was, I think, 19 years old. And I did make it out of the prelims, got my notes back. They said, your Brahms sounded like Strauss, your Mozart sounded like Strauss, your Mendelssohn sounded like Strauss, and your Strauss was awesome. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, stylistic difference. That makes a difference. Okay, good. Okay, so I noted that.
You are going to love this conversation with one of the young stars of the bass world for sure. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting with Blake Hinson, who serves as assistant principal bass of the New York Philharmonic and also teaches bass at Stony Brook University. Before that, he served as principal bass of the Grand Rapids Symphony and was also a fellow in the New World Symphony. Blake and I got together in person during my recent trip to New York City. Super fun. We were wandering around Riverside Park, chatting. It was raining, so you'll hear some pitter-patter of rain throughout. That's what that sound is. And we dug into so many great topics revolving around auditioning, around practicing. He's got some great practicing tips. Holy cow. I've started using some of his slow-mo advice, which you'll hear in this, and so many other topics. His time studying with Hal Robinson and Edgar Meyer, and much more. I'd like to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, Colstein Music, D'Addario Strings, Steve Swan String Bass, and Upton Bass. More on them in a bit, but let's dig into this conversation with Blake Hinson. Okay, I'm going to set the scene. I'm here with Blake Hinson, sitting in Riverside Park in September, talking, and we're under an umbrella right now because there's a little drizzle going
72 and sunny. No? Oh, wait, no.
Maybe not.
Sorry,
okay.
Sorry. Never mind. Yeah.
And we have some shared history, too. That I grew up not too far from Blake.
Midwestern boys.
Yeah.
That's right, man.
So West Des Moines.
West Des Moines. Grew up there. First 16 years of my life. Yeah, it was great. I always tell people Des Moines is the best place that you can grow up. Really, I have so much affinity, love for my time there. Yeah. It's great. The Midwest is the place to be. Yeah.
When did you start playing bass?
I started playing bass, I guess, when I was about 10 years old.
Yeah.
And that was 4th grade. The story goes, it was the one that you didn't have to take home.
I know that story.
And my mom, she said, I don't want to carry that thing, but she carried it for about a year, and then I grew big enough to carry it myself, and then suddenly I realized I had gotten myself into trouble. So, yeah, that's... Yeah, and that's the simple story of how I started bass. I actually started on guitar beforehand because my dad played guitar, and he played in a band in high school. And the Squires was the name of it. Yeah. Nice. And so he actually started me on guitar, and then it was just a natural transition to the double bass, and soon enough, the double bass took more precedence, and then it became my thing,
And I read, doing my research, that a pivotal moment for you was going out to the Golden Gate Bass Camp.
Totally.
With Barry Green.
Oh, okay. Totally.
And
yeah.
I've been teaching there the last few summers, out there in San Francisco. So
I had the best time there. I particularly remember the year. It was when I was 14. So basically, what happened was Ray Brown was supposed to be coming that summer. And he actually passed away, I think, a week before the festival happened, and everyone was really bummed. I had never even gotten to meet him, and we, the world had lost a legend of the bass. And David Murray, who's the professor of bass at Butler University, he gave a memorial recital, and I remember just being struck by his playing. It was really something special. I had never really thought of music as a communicative language. It was more so pressing buttons up until that point for me, and hearing David Murray just emote so much about how much this man meant to him really just, it inspired me. And I remember directly after that, I was working on Capuzzi at that time, and I stepped on the accelerator, and I pulled out Dragonetti, and I just worked my butt off, and that's what really sent me on my way. I know the exact moment where it happened. It was actually during the Bottesini Reverie, and it was just, it really emotionally moved me, and I had never let music do that to me before that point, and I'm grateful I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
You were 14?
14.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you come back to West Des Moines.
So
Fire it up and ready to go.
Fire in the belly, just practicing as much as I could and just trying to get as good as I could, as fast as I could. And so the next step, I had a great teacher in Iowa. His name is Phil Peters, and he was also the orchestra director at Valley High School. He was fantastic. He played in Des Moines Symphony. And then after studying with him for quite a few years, I wanted to, move to the next level. And so there were a couple options that were on my plate, and my mom had offered to drive down to North Texas because I had taken a lesson with Jeff Braditich at that point, and we got on really well with each other, and we vibed. But I didn't really want to drive. I think it would have been 7 hours there, 7 hours back and then a 2-hour lesson in the middle. Right. And obviously I wouldn't be driving, but that sounds like a horrible, horrible weekend.
It's a lot, yeah.
As a high schooler. And so I was actually at Boston University Tanglewood Institute the summer. I guess this was when I was just turned 16, and I ran into Larry Wolf. And Larry Wolf he gave a masterclass to the Tanglewood Music Center fellows, and I was struck. I was impressed. I thought he was super cool. He had great ideas, and he was just a master of the instrument. And I after that, I basically finagled to play for him for a lesson. And at the end of the lesson, I was so pumped and so jazzed. I said, "Mr. Wolf, if I could make my way out to Boston, would you be able to teach me?" And he agreed. He said, "Yeah, I could do that." And so then it came onto the path of, okay, how do I get out to Boston? Well, I knew Laura Tilke, who taught the chamber music program at Boston University Tanglewood Institute, and she told me that she also taught at a school called Walnut Hill. And Walnut Hill is a boarding school. It's kind of like an Interlochen of the East Coast. Yeah. And I applied. I got my scholarship all lined up. I got all of my bells and whistles in place, and then I told my parents. And they flipped. It was kind of a rough ticket. I probably shouldn't have done it that way. I'm not recommending anybody listening to do it that way. In fact, it didn't really go as well as it should have. But at the end of the conversation, my dad, he didn't look at me. We were on the phone. He said, "Blake, I'll work on your mother," and that's what he did. And then about a week later, he called me and he said, "All right, I think we know that this is the right move." So that's how I ended up in Boston for a year, and it was great.
So Walnut Hill in Boston, and you're working with Larry Wolf.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what happened?
So basically, I spent my year at Walnut Hill, and that's actually a partner program with New England Conservatory. And so I would go in on the weekends, take my lessons with Larry, and have orchestra rehearsal with YPO, which at that point was led by Benjamin Zander. I had up to this point, I had always knew that I kind of wanted to study with Hal and Edgar. They were my idols. They were my guys that I just knew if I could study with them, I would be on the right path. And the clearest path towards that is obviously Curtis. So what I talked to Larry within my first couple months there, and I said I really I would like to consider this, and he was so supportive. Honestly, he is a fantastic teacher. I couldn't be more grateful for what he gave me. And so we just worked really hard together to get me centered. What he always told me is, he said, "I'm here to keep you honest, Blake. That's my job." And he kind of funneled me into a really, because I wanted to do everything. The world was my oyster. In high school, you don't have limitations because you don't know the limitations, and that's really, really, that can be daunting as a student, thinking, oh, what can I do? What can't I do? But at the same time, Larry, he was very much so. He was key in guiding my progress. So the pieces I auditioned for Curtis on were Zigeunerweisen and Von Hall. And up until this point, I had gotten better by jumping into too deep water, making sure that the piece that I was playing was just too hard for me, and that the people around me were better than me. That was always my key to getting better, is just making sure that the people I surrounded myself by were truly, truly great musicians, and that what I was pushing for was a stretch. And so I auditioned February 26th. Of 2005, I guess that would be, and I was fortunate enough to get in. It was a super cool experience. The night before, Edgar gave a master class to all the Curtis students. Paul Cowart was there. Paul Cowart's in the Punch Brothers, and various other bands, and Joe Campagna, who's now in Pittsburgh Symphony. He played Arpeggione Sonata. It was phenomenal. It was awesome. I was just blown away by the caliber of the student. But then on top of that, Edgar gave his first live performance of the Fifth Bach Cello Suite in that master class, and it was nuts. I think we all had, adrenaline flowing through our veins, super hardcore after that class. The people, and the people who were in that room with me are all people you see in big gigs right now. It's Derek Zadinsky, I believe, maybe he wasn't even sitting next to me, who was in Cleveland Orchestra, and then went on to go to Curtis as well. I was really, really fortunate to have gotten in, and because it's kind of a crapshoot. It's a really difficult thing to do, and it could be anybody's day, just as any audition could be.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Make sure you have the right size string for your bass. String sizes are determined by playing length, the distance from nut to bridge. If your bass has non-standard after lengths before the nut or after the bridge, you may need a different size than you think. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, which is home to the largest collection of double basses on the West Coast between Los Angeles and Canada. That's a lot of miles, folks. Steve's showroom is outstanding. Absolutely worth a visit. It's located just south of San Francisco Airport, SFO, and he has about 70 basses on display. And these basses range from student entry-level instruments all the way to the finest professional instruments. I've sent so many students and referred so many people to Steve's shop. He really does great work. And if you're looking for a bass, you're going to find one that suits your needs, your playing needs, and your budgetary needs for sure. SteveSwanStringBass.com is where you can go. And thank you, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast.
Well, and then you're working with teachers like Hal Robinson, Edgar Meyer, and Edgar. Again, doing my research, he really shaped how you think about the left hand, but also the right hand, right? Just technique. Talk about that.
Yeah, so Edgar has a very, very interesting left hand concept, and there are rules that he has, but more so the way that I learned how to. Or my fingering methodology that I got from those guys is really, it's based in learning rep with them, just kind of starting to identify similarities between passages and how Edgar would maybe handle things, or how Hal might handle things. I remember I would consistently come into bass class with Hal, and we'd be playing excerpts of some sort, and I'd say, "All right, Hal, I got the fingering. Oh, I got the fingering that it's the best. It's the best one. It's the best." And he'd say, "Okay, well, let's see it." And then I'd play it, and it would usually go okay. It wouldn't always go the best, but I think the best thing for me learning from both of those guys was when to use because they both use fancy and old school fingerings, both of them. And so really just determining when you make that change is what I think the difference is, or what I mostly learned is when to go fancy and when to just go bread and butter, Edgar has rules that I kind of live by. One of my favorites that is, there are plenty, but slurred passages, playing a half step across a slurred passage, there's going to be some wacky ring that you can have, but then he breaks those rules sometimes, and Edgar often talks about how he doesn't really like his third finger that much. He'll almost always play octaves between thumb and 2 as opposed to thumb and 3. If you measure out the distance, typically they're very similar. And so, discovering those little things, I recorded every lesson, and oftentimes, especially when I was trying to learn more of Edgar's specific technique, I would record, and I would take it on the computer and I'd put it in slow-mo, and I would just analyze all the movements of his hands and where everything was going. I had him, Derek Zudinsky had him play the fifth suite for him. I had Edgar play the second suite for me. And so basically what it was is it was not just learning directly in the lessons. It's a lot of observation, and that getting that window into that world was really key.
Recording.
Yeah.
Again, I think something you've done a lot throughout your practicing, listening to recording. Talk about how recording has played a part in your practicing and preparation process.
Well, so in terms of auditions, recording is imperative. And the first person that I really that hit that home to me was actually Scott Dixon. He's also he's a fantastic teacher, player, just all around great guy. And I remember when I was auditioning, and this is when I was in New World. I briefly sent him just a Facebook message saying, "Hey man, you're successful. How are you successful?" And he wrote me, it was a really long message, and he barely knew me at this point, but the information that he provided was so helpful. And he basically, what he talked about is he talked about his time at Rice, how he got friendly with the janitor so he could get into the hall after hours, and what he did is he put a recorder in the back row of the hall, and what he would do is he'd run his list, and he'd play through that stuff. And then what he would do is he'd listen and say, okay, well, what happened? What actually got conveyed out there? Because oftentimes we think we're doing something, but we're not doing it extreme enough that the message actually gets kind of kerfuffled over, 15, 20 feet. And so I took that a step further, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to learn what those differentiations were from here and there. So I actually would set up a recorder close to me, a recorder far away, in whatever space I could, and I would judge the differences, because when you put the recording side by side, you'll notice, wow, what you hear out there is so different. And I know a lot of people say that, and it's hard, and as a young student, you doubt that. It's very easy to doubt that. It's very easy to say, nah, there's no way that sound didn't make it out there. And I think that it's part of string playing. If you look at any great violinist, they play super loud. My wife, she plays violin. She's a loud player for sure. She has a really big sound. But I don't like to be in the exact. I'll be in the other room when she's practicing, because she plays with such a massive sound. And so I think that those are just the rules of string playing, is that the sound does develop over distance. So back to recording. Sorry.
No, it's great.
Yeah. So the recording by myself, that was a really, really helpful element. But another really helpful thing that I started doing was when it came to auditions, I would actually text a group of maybe 4 friends that I really respected their opinions big time, and people that I would be afraid of hearing me play bad. That kind of thing. And I would send them a picture of, say, like an orchestral audition list, and they would pick out each of them. I'd say, each of you guys, could you pick an excerpt in the solo? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to record it one take. That's my rule. And so this trick takes a bit of personal honesty. You have to be willing to fall on your face in front of your colleagues and friends, but as a result, you can replicate that live audition feel a lot better. And so what I do is I'll record a single take of everything going through. If I mess up, I send it. If it's great, I send it. If it's only okay, I send it. That's the rule. And that maintains the illusion of, a semblance of live performance. And that was really, really helpful. I guess I started making that change after I won my job in Grand Rapids Symphony.
Okay, so this is all post New World.
So post New World, and that's post. I guess that's post Grand Rapids. But since Grand Rapids, that's one I've employed. And also, technology has gotten easier and better since then. You sending videos, it's progressed. Now it's not a thing. It ain't no thing.
Yeah.
It's super easy. And so you don't really have to think about it that much. Oh, and another thing that now I use big time in teaching, which is super helpful, is the iPhone has a slow-mo feature, and I exploit that thing every lesson. Just yesterday, a student and I were working on Beethoven 7, just that bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum, and we were, we had a lot of serpage to cover in the lesson, and we got to a point where I said, you know what, can we do the slow-mo thing where I just play it? And he said, totally. And that's what we did. And so they're doing the exact same thing that I did in school, where it's just analyzing this video of somebody who knows what they're doing. And it really, I know it works because every single week we do this, they come back and I don't have to say it again. It's
wow.
great,
I've never thought to do that.
Oh.
What a great... I didn't even realize you can do that on the iPhone. I'm going to have to have you show me, Blake. I didn't.
It's so awesome.
Wow, what a great idea.
Like one of my favorite things, I have an exercise that was taught to me by Eric Larson about how to basically throw the bow, and the idea is that you want the tip of the bow to appear as if it's an elliptical. And so what I'll do, because it's sometimes harder to see as a student whether or not you're getting that, what I'll do is I'll just record the student. I'll show them, okay, well, you're not quite getting elliptical. You have too much cut, or your bow is too low, too high, something like that, or there's plenty of variables that can change. But I love the slow-mo feature, and I use it all the time. I use it in my practice. Yeah, it's great.
Samuel Kolstein, who founded Kolstein & Sons back 70 years ago at this point, Sam was largely self-taught. Here's Barry Kolstein about how his father got into the business.
It was mainly self-taught,
yeah.
but I will pay homage to people that need to be paid homage. He did study a bit with Al Eisenstein, who was a great repairman in Manhattan. He was considered one of the top, and Al was very gracious. He allowed my father to sit at his side, watch him work. But a lot of it was self-taught. My father was a very ingenious person. He really would look at a problem and figure out 5 ways of doing it, and then choose the right way always.
Ever since those early years, Kolstein & Sons has been working to solve problems for bass players, provide them with ever better instruments and new opportunities in terms of travel basses and cases and all sorts of things that we need as bass players. Thank you, Barry, and thank you, Kolstein, for everything that you do and for sponsoring the podcast. Upton Bass is at a fascinating transition from selling accessories online, kind of in the early days, to selling other people's basses, to starting to make their own basses, which they now do and make over 120 a year. Here are Eric and Gary of Upton Bass on that transition.
So then we stopped getting containers of instruments.
Right, yeah.
Which was
a lot of dough all at once. So it was taxing, and the quality was going down with every shipment, And at that point, we were doing so much ourselves anyways, final assembly, varnish, setup. It was kind of a no-brainer to start making them in-house.
Whatever your playing needs are, Upton Bass will find you an instrument that works with your budget and that you will love for the long term. They have an amazing, loyal fan base that has bought, several people have bought 2, 3, even 4 Upton Basses over the years. They stand behind their products. They're beautiful instruments made in the Northeast in the United States. UptonBass.com, and thanks so much for sponsoring the podcast.
So that all was post Grand Rapids, that this recording and starting to text people videos and everything, and so that's a great technique, and that's a technique it sounds like you're using a lot. If you could look at your audition prep process, like I talk to people a lot of the time, they see an audition comes up, their prep process starts 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out or something. You may have a similar different setup. What did your prep process look like? And then in the auditions, I'm assuming that New York wasn't the first audition you took post Grand Rapids. Maybe it was, but like, what did that process look like, prepping for New York or any other post Grand Rapids audition?
Well, it's interesting. There's so many thoughts on when it's easiest to take an audition, and it's just never easy to take an audition. I can tell you that. So my first audition was San Diego Symphony. That was when I was, I think, 19 years old. And I didn't make it out of the prelims, got my notes back. They said, your Brahms sounded like Strauss, your Mozart sounded like Strauss, your Mendelssohn sounded like Strauss, and your Strauss was awesome. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, stylistic difference. That makes a difference. Okay, good. Okay, so I noted that. When you're preparing for an audition and you don't have a gig, you have more time. You just do. And so you have the freedom to maybe hold off till 4 weeks ahead of time or 3 weeks ahead of time, and you can really just hit the pavement hard, 5 hours a day, just really putting in serious good work. That's kind of the way I did it. I always have amped up my practice. I don't maintain a 5 hour a day regimen. I'm probably, when I'm on the gig and we're actively playing, I'm probably playing 2.5 hours a day outside of the gig, just for standard practice. And then if I have a recital, then obviously you have to amp it up. Any playing like extra playing engagements, it's a per gig kind of basis. But I guess my general rule of thumb is if I'm putting in 2.5 hours of actual practice time, I'm doing pretty well for my. At least I feel that way. It's tough when you're on the job, because you have less time and you're more exhausted.
Right.
Playing time is cumulative. The bass is not an easy instrument. It's not easy on the body. You have to be really cognizant of hurting yourself. And so a lot of when it comes to the prep that I do, you just have to be more and more efficient. And you have to learn how to really, really just make sure things go your way almost every single time. And exposure is one of the best things. I can say that constantly playing through fake rounds is a really, really good way to practice. One of my I show all my students this. Whenever I commit to an audition, I always make a book. I always make a very, very neat, or as neat as I can make it, book where it has all of my decisions, all of my fingerings, basically everything's kind of decided. And if I want to make a change, great, I can make changes. But it's harder to make a change from nothing than to put something down and then say, okay, that was not the right decision. And so that's a big thing for me. I put a practice plan in the back of all those books, and I usually go through 2 or 3 practice plans for any given audition. And a practice plan basically is, my first day, so each one accounts for maybe about 2 hours of practice. Because in the end, for an audition, I probably max out around 4 or 5 hours. I don't really go more than that when it comes. And that's not necessarily only physical; it's also mental. I really get burned out, and especially if you're burning the candle hard for a month or maybe 2 months, you have an apex of when you're playing your best, and you have to learn how to orchestrate that apex for the day. But the problem is sometimes these auditions are over the course of a week. So what do you do in that situation? Well, then you just have to basically make your bottom level a little bit better, as opposed to just being super, super amazing in the moment. You have to basically say, okay, my worst day is better than this guy's, best day or whatever. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, because most auditions you show up to nowadays, there's a lot of people who have really, really good worst days.
Right. Right.
But so these rounds that I pick out, it'd be on just a Word document. I probably maybe have 9 out there, and they're just varied styles, because that's a big thing for auditions. Committees. I've sat on committees, and one of the biggest important things is obviously rhythm is super, super important. Intonation, those are all kind of givens. But changing styles successfully is not an easy thing to do, especially when you are super nervous. I have nerves. Sometimes they're apparent, sometimes they're not apparent at all. Usually, mine actually manifest in like a runny nose,
really, okay.
Cold hands,
yeah,
and I didn't have that inner voice till I read the Inner Game of Music, surprisingly enough.
No, Barry!
No, it's okay. But at the same time, I would have found it at some point in time, just because that's inherent to being human.
Right.
You if you're being critical of yourself, you have that voice. And I remember that change happening. But so these rounds that I craft basically might be, okay, my solo Bach, let's see, a Strauss excerpt, a Mendelssohn excerpt, and then a Bach excerpt of some sort, or it could be a concerto, an orchestral solo, and then a couple varied excerpts from different composers, Schoenberg, and then moving straight to a Haydn. Those are 2 interesting composers. It's because Schoenberg, I guess you have to kind of think, I'm playing this very close to the way I'd play Strauss or something like that. And then for Haydn, obviously, we think, okay, maybe Mozart, Mendelssohn-esque, classical style. but making those subtle changes is really important. So that's what I do, and so each of those rounds will have maybe 5 elements, and I'll try and cover those over the course of 2 hours, and then I'll give myself some time off. Also, but I don't just to clarify for anybody listening, I don't go 2 hours straight. I can't do that. I don't have the capacity to focus well for 2 hours. I have put in plenty of 2-hour chunks where I'm playing bass and really, on the instrument, but I don't always count those as practice time. Sometimes you need to play. Sometimes you just need to play, and that's a part of the process too. But you have to kind of be respectful for when you really need to internalize this work and really get down to it. And so on those days where I'm doing that, it's probably I'm doing maybe 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, something like that.
Give yourself a break, get a drink of water or coffee.
Like
or something.
Yeah. I mean, surprisingly enough, coffee is really relaxing for me, even though it doesn't make sense. I really. So I guess I'm a weirdo, but plenty of people are weirdos for coffee.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Me too.
Yeah.
When you're in that, so I like the concept of sometimes you just need to play for sure, right? Sometimes, but then that deliberate kind of practice. Are you recording in both of those styles of practicing, or are you mainly recording in one or the other? Or how does that fit into like the actual, like you got your 2.5 hours of blocks with time you're practicing? Like how does that recording fit in? And
so you have to be careful with recording.
Yeah.
You can, I think we all say it. We're all our worst critic, and you can kind of get in the dumps about it. I mean, if you're really being critical of your playing, typically it's not always easy to be hard on yourself, and it's not always comfortable, and it's not always fun. I mean, practicing's not always fun. Sometimes the reason you're practicing is so you can perform and have a really good time performing. And so I'm not recording all the time. I'm not recording every ounce of my practice. What I'm doing probably is recording specific bits. My high school rule that I had was I would at the opening of my practice session, after I'd done my scale regimen and just all my left-hand warm-ups and stuff like that, made sure I was really playing healthily. I would do a run of some passage or piece, and typically it was reflective of something that I had worked on before. So if I had, for instance, I specifically remember doing this with a tape recorder for Zagunarweisen. What I would do is I would play through a 2-minute chunk, and I would just, after I played through the 2-minute chunk, let my arms cool down for a bit and just listen, and then listen with a notepad, and I would try to identify 3 things that I knew that I knew went wrong, and then I would think about 2 things that I could do to fix those 3 things, and I would just kind of hammer through those, and then I'd play the same 2 minutes again at the end. And I'd evaluate what the improvement is. I think that sticking to tangible times when you practice is a really wise choice, because I think you can beat a dead horse.
Yeah.
And you can get into a spot where you just say it's not good. It's not good.
Yep.
It's not good.
Yep.
It's not good. There is a point in time where I just say, today's not the day. You're not gonna have. It's not the day. And you just have to be respectful of the fact that we're human. And that we have limitations, and that sometimes every day's not going to be your best day.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a long game.
Yeah,
it's a
play the
long process.
Long game. Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes work can expand to fill the time you allot it, and you can be. That time management. We've all been there, pounding our head against the wall on a passage. So you're doing. Teaching, and you're working with students at different levels. What are some either technical or musical issues that you see time and time again? Someone walks in, you probably find yourself talking about a couple of different things. Are there any commonalities? Or
I wouldn't say that there's a chronic problem that I see across the board. I think everybody kind of has their own thing.
Everybody's coming in their own.
Everybody has their own little doodad that makes them special or makes bass playing difficult. I'd say that for a long time, I think a lot of people tend to focus mostly on the left hand, and I would say that might be a failing of populist. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that
it's easier to talk about the left hand because it's numbers and positions, you know?
Yeah.
That's always been my theory is like it's second finger, it's first, it's this or that, you know?
Totally.
Where you've got this like paintbrush element to the bow that's a little more mysterious. I mean, works like, and I know you've worked on these like the contemporary concept, the Zimmerman book,
Totally.
or Hal's
yeah.
wonderful
Totally.
stroking book.
Oh, yeah.
Those go a long way towards paintbrush.
Demystifying. Yeah. Well, and actually, I would love to add another book or another pedagogue to that mix. He's actually a violinist in the UK. His name is Simon Fisher. He really has been quite inspirational in terms of right hand play. And what he does is he has a series of DVDs, books out. I love his book called Practice. It's written from a perspective of a violinist, but everything in there can be parallel to a bass or any instrument.
I'm feeling shame right now because I have that book sitting on my bookshelf unopened.
Oh no! Oh,
so
it's
I have some
so
homework
good.
to go.
Oh,
Okay,
it's
yeah,
so
yeah.
good, man. Oh, I love that. And
Nice.
honestly, that's it's key in demystifying that right hand. He basically breaks and what he says, and I say this too now. Basically, everything we do in music can be boiled down to one word, and that's the word proportions. Everything is splitting a string length. You're choosing a place between 2 points where you are pushing your bow, and then you're changing the weight of all. You know, it's all simplified proportions: speed, weight, placement. You know, and he boils it down to you have 5 places essentially that you can play on the distance between the fingerboard and the bridge, and quantifying those distances is just, I think, the next step to books like Hal's Stroke. And I mean, Hal's that book is on my stand all the time. I love that book. It's one of my warm-ups. I remember I went so at Curtis when I was there. Alex Hanna was also there, and we would talk a lot about this stuff. And one thing that he always told me was, he said, whenever I need to kind of reset or you know, feel at home on the bass again, I just spend some time in that book stroking, and it really does a lot. And because there's so many variances of what you can do and what things you can focus on, learn from that book, and obviously, there are so many books out there. I mean, that Fred Zimmerman book, I've spent tons of time with that. I mean, that's actually big time helpful when it comes to excerpts, especially. But not even just excerpts. I mean, when it comes to planing your right hand across the instrument, taking the left hand out and just saying, okay, what is my right hand doing? Is it moving as efficiently as possible? Is it placed properly? And is it really not only is it placed properly, but is the sound that I'm getting the type of sound, not just the dynamic of sound? And is it the dynamic, or is it the quality of the sound or the timbre? Because you can have a soft sound with an aggressive tone, or you can have a really loud sound with a kind of a supple tone. And so I really, really love those DVDs and the book Practice. The book Practice, I regularly use as many as I can remember.
Okay. Okay. Wow, this is super fun.
Yeah, totally.
We got to do this more than once.
We're done?
We can be well. No, I have one. I typically wrap. I typically have one traditional question I ask people,
okay, cool.
and there's no way we can get into everything
Sure,
there
of
is to
course
talk
not.
about.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'd love to dig into. We could spend 3 hours talking about every excerpt and the way you approach. So
I'd love it.
I want to be
I'm a
respectful
nerd.
of your.
I'm a total nerd, man. I am proud.
Well, give. I usually wrap up with something about advice for your younger self.
Yeah.
And if you could go back to Blake that year, Walnut Hill, and you're headed off to Curtis or anywhere in that time frame, and you could give yourself some advice, what might you say?
I would say the music and the technique can come at the same time. They don't have you don't have to get the technique first before the music. Because I spent so many years just thinking I'm not technically gifted enough to convey my musical message, and I just think that that's not true. So I would go change that, because that's almost solely what I focus on now. Just what is my musical message? Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think it's something that people for you try to build the technical foundation, and you spend you'll never be done, and doing that and not integrating any sort of expressivity or musicality.
Yeah. I mean, I always go back to that Victor Wooten quote. I think he did a little masterclass at David Gage's shop in New York, and it was he basically just he always does this. He talks about music like a language. It is a language, and if you press buttons as a language for 6 years, it's going to take a lot of time to really break that habit. And so, yeah, no, I music first, baby.
Boy, the music lesson, that Victor Wooten's book, that's such a remarkable, it's all about that subject. And actually, circling back to one of the earliest things we talked about, Barry Green recommended that book to me, and I can't believe I hadn't read it. It's been out for years and years, but I read it, and that's a great way to sort of get your compass straight.
Totally. Yeah, man.
Blake, I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Blake, thank you so much for talking with me, and we'll definitely be doing a round 2 in the future. And something I love doing with people in a job like what Blake has. I did this with Orrin O'Brien, one of his colleagues in the New York Philharmonic, and also with Brian Perry of the Dallas Symphony, is go through and really talk about every major bass excerpt and what they hear in auditions, what they're looking for, how they approach it. I'd love to do that in some sort of more organized fashion. It's just something that came to mind as I was talking with Blake and as we were getting ready to put this episode out. So hopefully we can do something like that with people like Blake and Brian Perry and Orrin O'Brien and so many others, maybe at an International Society of Bassists convention, maybe at some other special event. I'm not sure. I haven't really fully formed that idea yet, but it's conversations like this that get my brain going in directions like that, and that's why I love doing these so much. I hope you really enjoy listening to these and you get ideas kind of like what I'm describing as you're listening. And I love hearing from people that listen to these episodes. It's so cool to hear what city you live in, what country you live in, what kind of bass you play, where you are in your career. Are you an amateur? Are you in a major symphony? And I hear from people in all walks of life, all areas of the globe. It's so cool how this podcast is bringing people together. It's the power of the internet. It's the power of podcasting, all that kind of good stuff. But it's true. It really makes a difference. So thank you for listening to this. And it's just such a thrill to be able to bring this to you each and every week, and that would not be possible without the Contrabass Conversations team, made up of Steve Hinchy, Michael Cooper. They edit the episodes. Trevor Jones publishes, promotes, does all kinds of behind-the-scenes work, super crucial. Mitch Mooring assembles these episodes, and also, by the way, assembles beautiful basses in his luthier shop. You can learn more about that at mitchmooring.com. And finally, Krista Copper, who archives and catalogs everything we talk about in these episodes. And why would we want that, you might ask? Because with this library, this oral history of the double bass that is being built over the years, there's a blurriness that occurs as you do dozens and then hundreds and eventually thousands of episodes. But there's power in that library, and if you can have a way to timestamp and know what was talked about with whom, when, and be able to access that, you can do all sorts of cool things like winning the audition, which we put out as a series in a book a couple of years ago, and with many more projects like that in store. So Krista is the person that makes that possible. Thank you, Krista. And thank you for listening to this podcast. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.